Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of real thought leadership video interviews brought to you by Mining Review Africa in partnership with the Minerals Council South Africa. As two leading bodies and brands within the African mining space, who better to bring you conversations with our sector's most influential names? And together, we're going to put the not so easy topics on the table about mining in South Africa. And who better to join me for our first video in the series than a man who needs no introduction, Neal Froneman, CEO of Sibanye-Stillwater, a mining visionary and a transparent and honest mining leader. So please join me in welcoming Neal today. So good to have you join me today, Neal.
It's an absolute pleasure.
So Neal, let's dive straight in with perhaps the topic around, I think, international markets with regards to mining in South Africa. I mean, Neal, you are the CEO of a mining company with a strong South African footprint, but also a growing international footprint. And that means that you deal with a lot of foreign investors. So from your experience, Neal, what is the perception of South Africa as a mining investment destination from the outside looking in?
So Laura, I think it's more than a perception. The facts speak for themselves. South Africa is unfortunately not perceived as an investment destination of choice. And you see it as South African companies and South African assets generally attract a risk premium, and that results in discounts that the South African mining stocks trade at relative to their global peers. So it's not just a perception, it's a real fact. Foreign investors have a poor image of our country for the following reasons, and I mean they are very obvious. Rampant crime, it's perceived as an unsafe place to send people. Rampant corruption, poor ethics. Government and local authorities lack competence and capacity to deliver services, which brings an additional burden to doing business here. As a result of this lack of capacity and competence, we have decaying infrastructure in terms of water, sewage, roads, general infrastructure, but of course, an unreliable and dirty electricity supply also features in the views of external investors. We also have a government with very clear socialistic and communistic ideologies, and it's frowned upon in the Western world, where capitalism is seen as something good, and certainly I believe it's something good, and as long as you share value in an appropriate way. And then of course questionable security of tenure with constant threats of nationalization and expropriation without compensation, and then of course a volatile and a very demanding labor environment. So those are all, let's say, very key reasons and important reasons why companies do not invest here and invest in other places where certainly many of these things are much better.
Some interesting thoughts there, Neal, and quite accurate and on point, to be honest, and something that South African mining companies, I guess, just needs to deal with. But they don't have to run away, I suppose. But Neal, one of the things perhaps that we should discuss, and it does feed on from the first question, is around communities. South Africa has a growing problem with unsettled communities. So what, Neal, in your opinion, are the underlying causes for that growing dissatisfaction within communities, particularly around mines? And if I can feed onto that question as well, Neal, do you feel the mining sector is partially to blame for under-delivery of their SLPs, or is it due to a poor focus on what communities really need to improve their lives?
Laura, it's a combination of many things, but I have to say that it's not specifically a mining issue, and let me start with the primary drivers. Poverty and inequality are the major drivers of angry people around the world, not just in South Africa. In South Africa, it's worsened by, let's say, almost non-existent economic growth and rampant unemployment. So those are the key drivers, and those are not just mining issues. This is a national issue. It happens to feature around mines because, of course, mines are seen as prosperous. Just to make the point, South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient worldwide. So this is really a national problem, and it's the reason we need to create economic growth. Now, when you couple that background of poverty and inequality, and you couple that with the lack of basic service delivery at municipal level, that's creating additional and very significant social hardship in communities. And of course, the communities look across the fence and they see that mining companies have services and appear to be prosperous. So of course, instead of attacking weak government, they tend to use service delivery protests to disrupt business, to put leverage again back on both business and government. So we have dissatisfied communities, and they do level their frustrations at business, and that just creates a vicious circle which threatens both our sustainability and theirs. To make matters worse, there's rampant corruption in local authorities, which means that the local authorities are ineffective in creating infrastructure because they are focused on the wrong things, and because of a lack of competence due to cadre deployment and so on. This lack of competence and capacity is leading to a further gradual erosion of existing infrastructure and the provision of services. If we as mining companies could make this the difference, and we can make a difference, and we are making a difference, we would. If that was the silver bullet, of course, we would step up and do even more. But this is a much broader issue of which we are on the receiving end.
Neal, it's interesting that in answering that question, you mentioned government and government's role in this whole scenario of what the South African mining industry is facing, and I want to touch on that a little bit more. And you explored it slightly, but I think we can dive a little bit deeper there. Neal, the government in South Africa is corrupt. I'm sure most people would agree, but there's another side to that. The government can't be corrupt by itself. And it does need, in my view, perhaps the private sector as the counterparty. So how do we stop that corruption, Neal? As you mentioned, is it just working together? What is it that we can do to sort of draw a line in dealing with this corruption issue?
Yes, absolutely, Laura. And you point a finger at government. There's four fingers pointing back at the private sector or the business sector. However, let me say that a fish rots from its head. So leadership of the country, which includes business, I'm not just pointing fingers at government, that's where consequences should start from, is with leadership of the country, who currently set very bad precedents and examples. I think that if business had the clear evidence that government has on corrupt activities, business would have taken much stronger action if those were businesses. So we've set a scene for everybody in South Africa that it's actually all right to be corrupt. It's actually all right to be dishonest. And leadership of this country needs to change that perception so that together with competent law enforcement and material consequences for perpetrators, both in government and their counterparts in business, there must be material consequences that would then create a an environment, where legal consequences are clear, and we have we start building a culture that is against crime and corruption. We have to stop corruption. I can assure you that the many business organizations that I'm part of do not tolerate corruption. They have business against crime as an example. What we need is political will and decisive action without fear or favor to eliminate corruption. Although we are still fortunate to have robust legal and judicial systems, they seem to have limited capacity to deal with this tsunami of crime and corruption. But just to be clear, at Sibanye-Stillwater, we have a zero tolerance approach to corruption. And that is the type of tolerance that is required right from the president down in this country.
Thanks, Neal. I think what really stood out for me is consequences for actions, and I think that would go such a long way to resolving that issue, as you say. So really poignant pointed out there. Neal, I want to hone in on the industry in a little bit more detail, more specifically industry and less sort of on a business scale. And the first question is around this topic of modernization and mechanization. You know, Sibanye is the owners of some of the oldest mines in the industry. Tell me, Neal, though, is it realistic? Is it practical? Can you modernize and mechanize such a mature mining industry?
Laura, I think the first thing is there's a huge difference between modernizing and mechanizing. Modernizing in my book means an awful lot more and covers how we embrace modern standards for conducting business and ESG excellence in particular. Modernization is mostly about humanity, making our operations ones where every individual is treated with respect. They deserve, embracing diversity and inclusion. You may see modernizing how we embrace stakeholder capitalism, and more commonly it's now known as shared value principles. So we conduct our business in a way that creates positive impacts for all stakeholders, that far outweigh any harm or disruption that results from our activities. So it's modernization is a higher level concept, and in fact I think the industry as a whole has done a lot more on the modernization of the industry through shared value than perhaps what is perceived. We use a term of being bionic, and bionic involves using modern mining or modernization of our approach to mining and so on, and combining that with technology and keeping people as your center of focus. Now, I think what you were specifically referring to is mechanization, and that is really replacing or assisting persons underground or even on surface for that matter with machines. And in my view, that's a panacea, especially in our country. We should not be pursuing mechanization where its sole focus is on replacing employees, especially where we have relatively low skills levels and high unemployment. Mechanization makes complete sense, though, when your prime focus is to reduce safety and safety risks and risk exposure. So there are places for mechanization. Modernization, of course, is an imperative and has to be done irrespective of whether we mature or the style of ore body. But let me continue just to build on the challenges around mechanization. So in general, it's difficult for us to mechanize conventional gold, and PGM operations, not due to their maturity. That is a consideration, but it's predominantly because of their ore body characteristics. So where we have ore bodies that allow mechanized mining, we do it. So Bathopele and Kroondal, our PGM mines are mechanized. Stillwater in the US is also mechanized, and their ore bodies are conducive to using mechanized mining. But I think in terms of this discussion, it's also important to just because mines are mature or because ore bodies don't lend themselves to mechanization, it does not mean that we shouldn't be, let's say, technology adverse. And in fact, we're not. We've adopted a digital first approach, which not only adopts digital technology, but creates cultures, structures, and processes that support digital transformation. And some of these specifically are things like running energy digital twins so that we can manage and optimize our power consumption. We have comprehensive satellite tailings management. We have a lot of seismic intelligence, digital water monitoring, processing plant optimizations. In terms of locomotives, we have digital monitoring to enable better safety and improved control systems. We have digital monitoring of our winch systems, predominantly again for safety and control. And we are in the process of developing the world's first low-profile, semi-autonomous battery electric load-haul dump unit. Now that's a mouthful, but that is key for our narrow reef type stoping operations. And then, of course, collision and avoidance and detection systems. So those are some of the technologies, and as opposed to mining, mechanization, those are technologies. So while these are great technologies and they will help to enhance safety and operational effectiveness, I think the most critical dimension is our people who need to work with these technologies. It's always people that make or break these systems. Successful implementation of digital technologies in particular need to be accompanied by significant shifts in working arrangements and so on. And we've done that, and we're very proud of our what we call our SOHO concept, small office, home office. You would note with your interactions that very few people actually work in offices in our organization. Obviously, those at the face need to be at the face and so on. But, you know, this has enabled employees to benefit from improved convenience and quality of life while also delivering stronger contributions. We have found that people who are marginalized by constraints in a traditional workplace, such as working mothers or people experiencing challenges in their families, can flourish under our new SOHO working arrangements. And this is just one example of how we're enhancing diversity and inclusion. We are enabling our people to work in harmony with technology and benefit from its use. And our longer term aim is to create a truly bionic organization. So, you know, technology, mechanization, modernization are all interlinked in a way, but that is my view of modernization, mechanization, and the introduction of technology.
It's interesting, Neal, when we look at mechanization specifically and some of the other technologies that you've mentioned, that there's a link to safety. And I do want to discuss that topic of safety. So I'm just wondering, Neal, if you feel that technology is the solution to where we are as an industry in terms of safety, because I think to be brutally honest, our industry has plateaued when it comes to our safety performance, if not perhaps even going backwards. Is it technology that will get us over that plateau, Neal? What are your thoughts about where we are as an industry with regards to safety?
Yeah, so safety is our most important value. It's our most important priority, and everybody looks for that one silver bullet that if we could just introduce, we can get to zero harm. I must tell you, my view is there's no silver bullet. It's a long journey to zero harm and zero fatalities. I would also argue that we should not suggest safety performance has plateaued, and we should be considering something like a 3-year trailing average analysis as when we do that within our own organization, we can see improvements. When you look at 1 year in this journey, it's a very short period, and you've got to look at trends over many years. So I think we need to do more analysis, and certainly there's been a rapid reduction in safety to this level. But that's, of course, using the low-hanging fruits to have made those improvements. But you will have years where, unfortunately, fatalities are higher than the previous year. But let's keep looking at the trends. We can and we still are engineering out risks. And to be blunt, it's only with real risk reduction that you'll improve safety. And safety is also a state of mind, and by far the largest majority of accidents are a result of employees knowingly breaking the rules. And I come back to my very first comments about a fish rots from its head. So, when you do not take action against dishonesty and you condone corruption, those are poor leadership qualities, and it starts right at the top of leadership in the country. So we as leaders have a huge role to play about setting and improving the behavior environment and ensuring that people make decisions according to our culture, and of course according to the rules. So culture and behaviors are very important areas of improvement. So, you've got to combine that with real risk reduction. In addition, world-class and state-of-the-art systems are also important in analyzing and tracking safety trends and behaviors. And there are still improvements that we can all make there. As I've discussed, we have embarked on this digital transformation technology journey, and that will certainly help us in achieving our goal of zero harm, because it'll reduce the risks, it'll improve our systems, and so on. So it's a combination of this. Leadership is of course, as I've said, important, and competence, in other words, training, are highly necessary ingredients in improving safety. So I wish there was a more simple solution, but it's an integrated solution, and it's a long journey. We need to get there as quickly as possible, but I do not think we must become disheartened or accept that we have plateaued. We must continually improve, and I believe that the managers and leadership of mining companies are working very hard to achieve all these goals.
Thanks, Neal. And, I understand or appreciate that the industry needs to get there quickly, but as you've said, it's not an overnight situation, and we do have to look at trends over time. And I think, as you've rightly said, over a longer period, the industry has performed and hopefully will continue to do so. Neal, we're really delving into some of these harder topics, and I'm enjoying your frankness and your response. So I'd like to touch on one more, Neal, and that's around the area of exploration in South Africa. I think for all intents and purposes, this part of the sector is non-existent. What do you think, Neal, is required to get investment flowing back into South Africa and to encourage exploration in the sector?
Yeah. So Laura, no one is well. Let me start by saying exploration is an investment, and in fact, it's a very high risk investment, and therefore, if the basics of not having an investor friendly environment are not there, you're not going to get exploration by putting in new systems. You've got to really address the national issues. Exploration is just a microcosm of the issues we've discussed earlier around what needs to change. We need to improve crime. We've got to stop corruption. We've got to make it easy for companies to come in and get mining licenses and permits. But they've also got to know that the law is not going to change, that their shareholders are not going to be abused, because this is really very high risk money. We have wonderful geological resources and features in this country, and if we could just change the investor friendliness of South Africa and do the things that I alluded to earlier, exploration will come automatically. You can't drive exploration unless you drive the bigger issues that go against attracting investors.
I guess at the core of everything, Neal, is that word investment, how important it is to really realize that that's essential and focal to everything that the industry requires going forward. So, Neal, we've had a good conversation, and we've really outlined and chatted about some of the key areas or issues that I've identified that need, sort of talking about in an honest way in this interview. But Neal, let me hand that over to you and say that if you were president for a day, what are the 5 things that you would implement to turn this country and this sector around if those things were definitely going to be implemented and successful? What would those 5 things be, Neal?
Yeah. So the first thing, I would stop all policies and processes that detract from the security of tenure, such as expropriation without compensation, the use of pension funds by government to build infrastructure, etc. Anything that smacks of infringing on the rights of an investor, I would stop those discussions. I would stop those policies and start creating an improved perception of security of tenure. That's the first thing I would do. Investors are not going to come here if they perceive weak ethics or an unsafe environment. So I would adopt a zero tolerance approach on corruption. I would fast track consequences of crime and corruption, together with improved policing on the streets to create a law-abiding nation. We do not have a law-abiding nation. We've got to change that culture. We've got to improve the way people drive on roads, stop them going through stop streets, stop overtaking on white lines, etc., etc. I would reduce the frictional cost by cutting red tape to create a more attractive environment for capital investment. I would also address the inefficiencies of the current labor system by introducing secret strike ballots to ensure unions act in the interests of their members. And I would rewrite the Labor Relations Act to be more balanced between employer and employee. At this stage, it's heavily weighted in the employee favor. One of the best countries in the world from an investment and capital point of view is the US. And there you can literally fire a person on the spot. And certainly if they're dishonest, you do not end up in court. They're lucky if they don't go to jail. So we need to get that balance right. Then we need to stop wasting money and privatize SOEs and ensure that they run in a way that is competitive with good management and so on, and at the same time spend on infrastructure projects to create employment which of course will improve with further foreign investment. And of course, we need to improve the state of critical infrastructure. You know, when you move outside of the main regions of Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, the infrastructure is collapsing, and no one seems to really talk about it, do anything about it. So those are the 5 things I would work on changing as quickly as possible.
Brilliant, Neal. What excellent answers there. Some real gems. I can't thank you enough, Neal, for taking the time to chat to myself and the Mining Review Africa and Minerals Council's audiences today. You know, your honesty and your transparency in answering and responding to my questions is truly appreciated, and I only hope that more of the industry would come together and be as transparent as yourself. It's how the industry improves, and I just can't thank you enough, Neal, for that. And I look forward to chatting with you as always, and thank you once again for your time today, Neal.